I want to introduce you to Katie. As a little girl growing up over on the West Coast, Katie was the quintessential church kid. Her mom and dad were both pastors, and so she was involved in a number of Pentecostal churches through her upbringing. She was immersed in religion. She was immersed in church, and as she's talked about it afterwards, the message she felt like she received from that was church and a lot of important rules. Church and a lot of things that were important to have the right appearance going forward, especially in a ministry family. When she got into her teens, she began to chafe under the expectations that she viewed were tight control and suffocating in her environment, and it seemed like she was always on display. People were clamping down on her, and she really had to watch what she did and said and mind her P's and Q's. When she got out on her own, she left it all behind, deeply disenchanted with Jesus and the church. All those confining restrictions for her, she just let it all go in search of something more meaningful and fulfilling for her life. And so today, she's described herself as a seeker, an explorer, looking for spiritual reality wherever she can find it. And she said, and this is a quote of this gal Katie, "I'm not a Buddhist, I'm not a Hindu, I'm not a Christian, but I still feel I have a deep connection with God." And we know her as Katy Perry. There's another story. This guy's name is Brad. Brad was raised in Springfield, Missouri, in a church family, Southern Baptist, actually. Like Katie, his upbringing was highly structured and very involved with the life of the church. Lots of emphasis on what you should and should not do, especially the should nots. But the rules seemed like rules. They didn't necessarily grow out of the expression of faith, at least in the way that Brad received it. And so he felt a constant pressure to conform. And when he didn't, he felt huge loads of guilt were placed on him. Parents changed churches, and the new church didn't really mesh with some of the rules of the old church. The pressure to be good was still there, and the guilt that haunted him was still there. But in the older church, the music had to be a certain way. In the newer church, they did all the upbeat new music, and it left him with the question, why am I being told that this is okay now, even though it wasn't good in the church before? How can we go to Christian rock concerts when I was told years before that it was the devil's music that was being played? And the questions that he had about both the faith and the culture around it, he didn't seem to find good answers for it. And so during his teen years, he also began to distance himself from how he had been raised. And it was over time, it was gradual, but the pulling away happened in his life. And looking back, he sees his defection as a natural result of feeling boxed in, constantly guilty, discouraged from asking questions. He began identifying initially as an atheist, then as an agnostic. And today we would describe him as having, he would describe himself as having a non-religious spirituality. Brad is Brad Pitt. There's one other person, we don't have a picture of this one. His name's Derek, and he's the lead singer, or was one of the lead singers of Caedmon's Call, the band Caedmon's Call. Caedmon's Call was a Christian rock band, and maybe you know them, maybe you don't. I grew up listening to them. I love them. And Derek was somebody who kind of had been outside of faith, came into the faith, was very musically talented, and so he was one who kind of got put up on a little bit of a platform quick. Was writing songs and obviously having a platform to speak. Thousands of people would come viewing him as an example of his Christianity. But he became somebody who went through what's called a deconversion or a deconstructing of his faith. And about that in an interview, he said this. He said, "I tried to believe for a long time. I wanted it to be true. But eventually, the version of Christianity I was given just stopped making sense." Not yet. Eventually, the version of Christianity I was given just stopped making sense. Now, we're not going to do a raise of hands, but I bet you would not have to think for more than 1 minute. Many of us, not more than 5 seconds, to say, who in your life do you know that relates to one of those stories? Somebody that either you were in the faith with and they no longer are, somebody you love, maybe they're a step or two distant from you, maybe family, maybe a friend, maybe somebody who's public. maybe somebody in your personal life. People leave the faith. The series that we're in, though, is about addressing some of the reasons why that happens and maybe doesn't need to happen. Because we have a opportunity to follow Jesus, but for a lot of us, like Katie and Brad and Derek, what we end up doing is being enmeshed in the culture of religion as we've seen it. Religion as we've experienced it. And the question this morning is it possible that the Jesus some people have rejected isn't the real Jesus at all? So we got 3 stories going in the wrong direction, and this last one is a video. We're going to show it in a second here of somebody whose life went in the right direction and says it very well. This video, some of you might recognize it, others of you are like, what is this newfangled video in the sermon that you've seen? This is a guy named Jeff Bethke, and this YouTube video went up 14 years ago, and it's been viewed 36 million times, and we're going to watch it now.
What if I told you Jesus came to abolish religion? I mean, if religion is so great, why has it started so many wars? Why does it build huge churches but fails to feed the poor? Tell single moms God doesn't love them if they've ever had a divorce, but in the Old Testament, God actually calls religious people whores. Religion might preach grace, but another thing they practice. Tend to ridicule God's people. They did it to John the Baptist. They can't fix their problems, and so they just mask it, not realizing religion's like spraying perfume on a casket. See, the problem with religion is it never gets to the core. It's just behavior modification, like a long list of chores. Like, let's dress up the outside, make it look nice and neat. But it's funny, that's what they used to do to mummies while the corpse rots underneath. Now, I ain't judging, I'm just saying, quit putting on a fake look. Because there's a problem if people only know that you're a Christian by your Facebook. I mean, in every other aspect of life, you know that logic's unworthy. It's like saying you play for the Lakers just because you bought a jersey. See, this was me too. But no one seemed to be on to me, acting like a church kid while addicted to pornography. See, on Sunday I'd go to church, but Saturday getting faded, acting if I was simply created to just have sex and get wasted. See, I spent my whole life building this facade of neatness, but now that I know Jesus, I boast in my weakness. Because if grace is water, then the church should be an ocean. It's not a museum for good people, it's a hospital for the broken, which means I don't have to hide my failure, I don't have to hide my sin. Because it doesn't depend on me, it depends on Him. See, because when I was God's enemy, and certainly not a fan, He looked down and said, I want that man. Which is why Jesus hated religion, and for it He called them fools. Don't you see so much better than just following some rules? Now let me clarify. I love the church, I love the Bible, and yes, I believe in sin. But if Jesus came to your church, would they actually let Him in? See, remember He was called a glutton and a drunkard by religious men. But the Son of God never supports self-righteousness, not now, not then. Now back to the point, one thing is vital to mention. How Jesus and religion are on opposite spectrums. See, one's the work of God, but one's a man-made invention. See, one is the cure, but the other's the infection. See, because religion says do. Jesus says done. Religion says slave. Jesus says son. Religion puts you in bondage, while Jesus sets you free. Religion makes you blind, but Jesus makes you see. And that's why religion and Jesus are 2 different clans. Religion is man searching for God. Christianity is God searching for man. Which is why salvation is freely mine, and forgiveness is my own. Not based on my merits, but Jesus' obedience alone. Because He took the crown of thorns and the blood dripped down His face. He took what we all deserved. I guess that's why you call it grace. And while being murdered, He yelled, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Because when He was dangling on that cross, He was thinking of you. And He absorbed all your sin and He buried it in the tomb, which is why I'm kneeling at the cross saying, come on, there's room. So for religion, no, I hate it. In fact, I literally resent it. Because when Jesus said, it is finished, I believe He meant it.
People move both ways, don't they? People move away. People move towards. This morning, specifically, we're going to talk about is the not that Jesus that we hope that you are not rejecting in your life. Or the not that Jesus, I think that sometimes there's the leavers. I mentioned some that are famous. I'm going to talk here in a minute about a friend of mine who did for at least a season before returning. We know people who have rejected, who have left, who have distanced. But I want to just direct this sermon to the leaver that's in you. The distancer that's in you. You might resonate with what I'm about to say, some version of it that you may have felt at a certain point in time. I had a good friend, and we knew each other growing up, and our lives went like this as it relates to faith, and so we were having conversations over the years, and in some of my attempts, by the way, young TJ wasn't necessarily wise TJ, and so we had some conversations that were good, and occasionally we'd have some conversations that were like, I think I might have hurt the cause right there with my attempt to share Jesus with him. But one time, and I don't think I'll ever forget, he wanted to put a stop to what we were doing, and he said, listen, I appreciate it, what you're doing and saying. I'm not going to get back involved with church. There's just so much I hate about it. Like, wow. First of all, that's a bold thing to say. But second of all, there's a part of it, I kind of get that. Nothing can be more disappointing to a young person growing up into their faith or an adult trying to take their faith, more seriously, sometimes than the actions or the words of other Christians, right? We can be discouraged by what we see happening with others, and particularly among other Christians, Christian leaders. One of the real difficulties about pastoring, and you have felt this in your life too, one of the real difficulties about stepping forward in ministry with people, to whatever extent you get a chance to do it, as a small group leader, as teaching kids or working with youth ministry, having any kind of spiritual influence at all, as you do, you realize, I'm putting myself forward in a way that means that if I do something dumb, it's going to be detrimental, not just to me, but somebody else too. I'd like you to hear all that follows directed to the lever that's in you, because I think there's a little bit of a lever or a little bit of a distancer in all of us. And the thing that I want us to start with, because it's the thing that's most easily missed, is that the people that Jesus had the most problems with, the people who opposed him most directly, and did it in such a way that all four of the writers of the Gospels said, we want to make sure that it's known that these people were against Jesus, and also, eventually, Jesus had to stand against these people. It was the public religious leaders of his day, the scribes and the Pharisees. Matthew 23 is the passage where Jesus gets most direct in his criticism with the scribes and the Pharisees. But before I tell you what he had to say there, I just want to maybe share a little bit about what the scribes and the Pharisees were about as it relates to Jesus as his ministry grew. Jesus became a traveling rabbi. He was a teacher of God's people. But he was a teacher of God's people who also was blessed by God and people, didn't know why, with working miracles sometimes. He was blessed by God all the time with teaching that really, really resonated, but also could shock people. In addition to his miracles and his teaching, the thing about him was his character and his way with people. People would leave what they were doing in their regular life and just go follow him for a period of time. And some of them stuck with him for years. Jesus came on the scene. There had been other traveling rabbis. This was a thing that happened. A person would raise up and people would be gathered around him. Maybe this person has God's hand on them. Maybe this will be the one who leads us towards finally throwing off the yokes of Roman oppression, or leads us towards something spiritual with God, whatever. I mean, John the Baptist had a following, right? I mean, this is a thing that happened in the culture. But Jesus was different. Public ministry was for 3 years, and through that period, what we see is that the scribes and the Pharisees began to come to him first with questions. Then with questions that were obviously trying to trip him up. Then sending their sharpest expert to ask him the one question that would probably decommission him because he wouldn't have an answer for it. They wanted to pull away his influence because he, as his ministry grew, pulled away from theirs. And as his ministry increased, they saw it as a threat not just to them personally, like, hey, he seems to know the Lord better, but they saw him as a threat to their whole way of life, to the structure of their culture, to their religious observation in the synagogue and in the temple, and they just had to ultimately stop Jesus, right? We know this. Well, Jesus would talk to them, would interact with them, but then he was critical of them. And finally in Matthew 23, he is the most critical of them that he is the whole time. And it's really the worst things that he has to say about any other people in all of his ministry. And in Matthew 23, what he calls the scribes and the Pharisees, the public religious leaders. And this is the way I think about it. Well, Jesus looks at the guys like me who would put a microphone where they could be heard and try to tell other people how it is that they can follow Christ or how they can follow God at that time. And these public religious leaders were so off, so wrong. They didn't just have religion, they had wrong religion. That in one conversation on one day, he says that they are whitewashed tombs and that they are hypocrites and that they are blind fools and that they are serpents and that they are a brood of vipers and that they are children of hell. Now listen, I've had some people have some pointed conversations with me that maybe we weren't on the same side of an issue. I've had occasionally, one time in particular, someone got real mad at me in ministry over something back when I was a youth pastor, and it was just misunderstanding. And but I'll never forget this person. They were convinced, not just that I made a mistake, but that I was a bad dude. But never have I been called these things. You know, Jesus calling them a whitewashed tomb. The idea that, okay, there's a tomb. Inside the tomb, there's lots of death. But they've gone and you've made pretty on the outside. You've slapped some paint on the outside. That's what you guys are. You are the ones who are full of death inside, but you make it really clear that you look good on the outside. He tells them that they are like a cup that got dirty on the inside, stayed dirty on the inside. It's real dirty on the inside, but they're not worried about washing the inside of the cup. They just make sure that the outside looks good. Those who have a problem with Christianity as they've observed it have something in common with Jesus. Jesus didn't fit well within the religion of his day either. Matter of fact, I think we all could make some criticism or critique of religion as we've experienced it, but not as sharply as Jesus did. Well, the first thing that I wanted to bring attention to is that Jesus had problems with this too. Let's look at how he addressed it. Meet me in your Bibles, if you would, in Matthew chapter 5. I skipped right over my first blank on the note sheet, and I want to make sure to not miss them. And so the first thing on your note sheet is that it's dangerous to elevate external conformity over inside-out transformation. And that Jesus went toe-to-toe with the religious and wrong. Matthew 5 starts the Sermon on the Mount. In the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew 5:20, he says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom. You will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus had to be direct enough with these religious leaders and with his standing apart from the religion of his day to say, if you're on their path, what you need to do is make sure that your righteousness exceeds theirs. If your righteousness does not exceed theirs, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Because religious people have outward displays. They've got words and pious acts. Maybe they don't have the heart that matches those pious acts, but they're going to have the outside of the cup washed clean, the public religious people. They're going to have the white paint on their tomb. And really, there's nothing wrong with looking well on the outside. The question is, does what you have happening inside match what you're representing outside? And I've always thought that's really what Jesus had a problem with. And so as we go from Matthew 5 into Matthew 6, Jesus is having a public teaching moment. Those who know this passage know it's the Sermon on the Mount. And he starts by telling them, you've heard it said. And the way that these public religious people talk about things, this is how they teach about anger. This is how they teach about murder. Don't do it. Because your righteousness has to exceed theirs. What I'm telling you is it's not enough to say don't murder. You've got to not live in anger. These religious people, you've heard them rightly teaching, you should not commit adultery. But I say to you, you don't need to worry about adultery. You need to worry about the lust in your heart. And if you have lust in your heart, there's already adultery that's happening within you. He raised a different standard on divorce and a different standard about oaths and what we do with our word and how we ought to hold that, letting our yes be yes and our no be no. And he raised a different standard about the eye for the eye and the tooth for the tooth. And we shouldn't be people who retaliate at all. The kingdom people are the ones who, if somebody wants to take their tunic, you're going to give them your cloak as well. And if somebody forces you, like a Roman soldier situation, hey, you got to carry my pack. If they force you to go a mile, you will be willing to go too. You just be willing to extend grace upon grace. That's what people do in my kingdom. That's the righteousness that exceeds that of these public religious scribes and Pharisees. And then the last bit in Matthew 5 is, he says, you've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and you can hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who's in heaven. He gets to the end, he says, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now for some of you, those are familiar words, and I think that there's two things about them that is important. Number one is, they're kind of impossible. That's one way to teach through that passage, to say, who is it that has lived without anger in their heart? Who is it that has, to get to the end there, figured out what it means to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect? So some believe that what Jesus is doing here is he's raising the standard that anybody who heard him speak that day, or heard a similar message at a different time, or for us who read it in Scripture, that what they would take from it is to say, nobody can do that. And there's something to it. But I think the big thing he was doing was he's pointing out this difference between there's a kingdom that you can enter into and walk in with God, and I want to teach you what that is, and ultimately through his death on the cross, his resurrection, and sending the Spirit, I want to give you entrance to this kingdom. I want to take you there. I want to help you be there. And in the kingdom, the way that the life works with God is so different than what you've had put in front of you in terms of public religion. It's like black and white. They want to make sure that they're not killing anybody, committing adultery, messing up the oath that they made to God in a religious way. What I'm telling you is it's the heart that matters. It's the inside transformation, or the lack of inside transformation, that matters. Who cares about the murder? Do you have hate in your heart? Who cares about the adultery? Do you have lust in your heart? Who cares about keeping your oath publicly? Is your word good enough both before God and man? And he's creating this different ethic. We come to know it as the kingdom ethic. And in Matthew 6, verse 1, you can read with me. He says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do, in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. He's telling them, hey, giving to the needy, good thing. But these people, these hypocrites, these public religious people who do it in such a way that they're sounding trumpets in front of them as they do it, any reward that could come to them from their gift, they've already received it. The way that they are religious and the way that they are more concerned with what other people see about them in this matter than what God sees about them in this matter, they may as well not even done it. They've received their reward. So when you do it, when you give, do it this way. Do it privately. Do it in secret. Your Father sees in secret, and He'll reward you. And then He goes on in verse 5. And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogue and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. And truly I say to you, they've received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room, shut the door, pray to your Father who sees in secret. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Everything I've said so far since the video has been to make the point that if there is a sense in you that resonates with any of the Leavers stories I mentioned at the start, man, I have been disappointed by what I've experienced in church. I have been let down by some of my leaders. The way that I learned the faith, I can't fully get with it, and it stops me from fully obeying the Lord. I'm just not able to be all the way there. The religion I have experienced, it's not all good. Like my friend who said, I can't go back to it, don't want to, because there's just a lot I hate about it. What I want to say to that spirit that might be in some of us, even faithful people, I'm talking about that divided part of your heart. I'm talking about the flesh. I'm talking about the enemy and what he would whisper to you in a private moment. Listen, that's not Jesus. And Jesus, who is the one we want to follow and worship and obey, he had that same problem in his day. His leaders were worse. They were after him, right? And they had reason to be. And it's different, but it's also the same. And what Jesus did with that issue in life as he looked at religious people is he took them and he took apart what they were doing and he tried to help people who were listening to him set them aside as well and say, hey, what's going on with the public religious people, who, by the way, are after me, they've got all the external show, but it's about your heart. They've got public displays of righteousness. It's about your heart. They're going to make sure that they obey the big ones and that you know about it. But it's about your heart. For anybody who's had a hard time getting their head and their heart around the religion aspect of things and feel a resistance to that, Jesus did too. Instead, Jesus offered blessing, rest, and relief to the religiously burdened. And everything else I have to say this morning is my favorite stuff about belonging to God. Everything else I have to say this morning is my favorite stuff about being a Christian. Here's how the Sermon on the Mount starts. You can read it on the screen. Seeing the crowd, he went up on the mountains, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. He opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now here's the thing about those blesseds. Most of them are things you don't want to have happen to you. Not all of them. Very few, even faithful people, are looking to be persecuted. Very few, even faithful people, are looking to be reviled or rejected, have people falsely say all kinds of things about you. Actually, I know some people who've had similar things like that happen, not to that level of rancor, but they have jobs where they're public, and so people have come and said, oh, I can tell you got a problem with me because you're the Christian person and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, nobody wants that. Who wants that? Some of them are more neutral, but they sound challenging. Poor in spirit. Those who mourn. Meek. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. But what's great about them is what Jesus is saying as he starts the Sermon on the Mount is, when you live with me and you are in my kingdom, no matter what's happening, you're blessed. If you are with the Father through being with me, if all kinds of bad things come against you because of that, you're blessed. If your character is drawn and driven into ways that are seeking the Lord more, going after Him harder, maybe through difficulty, that's the way that happens, you're blessed. And to be blessed in the way Jesus is talking about blessed is to experience what is called in the Old Testament the shalom of God. The deep down, abiding peace of God that's not got anything to do with what's going on in your life. The shalom of God is not, I feel good with God because my bank account is good. The peace and shalom and the blessed that Jesus gives and proclaims over them is, I don't know what's going to happen when my bills come due this month. I've got people against me because I'm following the Lord. I feel alone. And to use Jesus' own words here, I feel reviled or persecuted. I've got people saying false things against me. Jesus gives relief to people by saying, hey, it's worth more to be with me. There's joy for you if you're with me. No matter what's going on, if you're with me, you are blessed. And so coming forward now, reading this after Jesus has died on the cross and risen in victory, the way we ought to feel about this is, if you belong to Jesus, when your feet hit the floor in the morning, you get out of bed blessed. I got up really early this morning. I wasn't feeling blessed at all. God, alarm came too soon. Darn it, You're blessed. Why? Because God's favor is on you. Why? Because Jesus doesn't come with a message of burden. He comes with a message of relief for religiously burdened people. He comes with a measure of blessing. He comes lifting your spirit. He comes taking the load off. He comes taking the big, heavy backpack of sin, but also expectation and burden, and removing it from your shoulders so that you can stand and breathe and be free, unburdened before the Father. In Jesus Christ, you're blessed. Or what I mentioned during the worship time, my favorite invitation that Jesus gives is Matthew 11, 28 to 30. He's in a crowded situation. He lifts up his eyes to the crowd and he says, come to me, All who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me. I'm gentle and humble of heart. And you'll find rest for your soul. Because my yoke is easy. My burden is light. Now, I want for 1 minute to talk to anybody in here who is either far from the Lord, sort of new to this, or feels like, well, I've been in this a long time, but I am not connected to it in my guts right now. Don't worry. You're not going to be asked to testify or whatever. Like, talk about how you're far from the Lord. Talk about how you don't know what I'm talking about. If you are in that spot, I want you to dial in on this part right here. This is what Jesus would say to you. If you're far from him, if you're new to this, if you are walking in disobedience, but you're willing to think about doing it different, if you're walking far from God and you know you're not with him, but you are willing to change, if there's something about what he's doing, either in the world or in the church or in your life or somewhere where you see it, where you're like, I'm drawn to that. I want that. I see something with somebody else that I don't have. It might be real. It might be realer than I'm giving it credit for. If that's you, I'm going to say at the very end, like, here's simply how you would take first steps with that. But like, if that's you, what Jesus would say to you is he would say to you, please come to me. I don't care that you don't know. I actually put things in your past so that you could hear this. If you're far from him and you know it, or you belong to him but you've gotten away, you know that. The question is really the Pharisee other person question. How is it with you? Are you ready to keep the good shield up and say like, nope, I know what's going on in my heart, but failure won't define me because that's what my Father does. I mean, I'm just going to sing the songs. I'm going to be the public Christian. I'm going to do the stuff. Maybe I'll think about it when I get home. Probably not. You are not going to penetrate me. Well, that's you. Jesus has a different message. But if you have a heart that's willing to yield, if you have a heart that wants to listen, if you have a heart that's like, if you could just tell me what to do to take the first 3 steps out of the hole I'm in, I want to be with Jesus. Come to me. All who are weary, heavy laden, I'll give you rest. Don't you want rest? Like, in whatever way it is that you have felt a burden, or you feel distant from God, or that you feel the weight of the sin, or whatever, wouldn't you love to rest? Not because you quit, but because God gave you something that brought you so near to him. It's like swept along on a great big wave of blessing, of mercy. See, that's what Jesus was offering. That's what Jesus was doing in the best, maybe the best way I can say it. He's full of grace. He's full of mercy. Come to me. I'll give you rest. I'm no good at saying what Jesus would say, but the people who were there in the day walking and listening to him. And then in the early church, after he had died and rose, who were now hearing this gospel preached, like, what are we talking about here? The message that came through to them was ultimately, yeah, there's discipleship. And you should walk with him. But it is discipleship in the atmosphere of the grace of God in Jesus. And the call to obey and to do hard things comes wrapped in the love of God, the mercy of God, the rest of God, the blessedness of God, the blessing of God, the come to me and find rest and peace of God. It's in this very invitation. He says, take my yoke upon you, like the stuff you should do. Learn from me, the stuff you should learn. Because I'm gentle and humble of heart. You'll find rest for your soul. The invitation of Jesus invites you to work in a way that brings you to rest. Invites you to rest in a way that brings you to work. Let me show you one more briefly in Matthew chapter 9. This is a great one. This is a story. I mean, true story, but this is a narrative. And this is the invitation of the disciple Matthew. It says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. He said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. Now, the fact that Matthew was sitting at the tax booth, what it means is Matthew's a tax collector. Tax collectors were terrible people. The first thing that comes to my mind is drug dealer. Now, they were not drug dealers, but they were a betrayer of their people. The tax collectors in Jesus' day were Jews who collected and extracted money from the Jews and gave it to the Romans. Nobody liked a tax collector. Everybody hated a tax collector. In fact, you go on down below there, Jesus reclined at table in his house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners. And other passages, it talks about tax collectors and prostitutes. Tax collectors were not on anybody's good list. Matthew's one of them, sitting at the tax booth. Jesus said to him, "Follow me." He rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. So go learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came to call the righteous." I came not to call the righteous. I'll throw away my whole sermon. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus is after your heart and what can issue forward from it. You know, at the start, we put up some pictures of some people. Hey, here's Katy Perry as a kid. She was once raised around all of this stuff. And she left. She rejected it. Hey, here's Brad Pitt. He was raised around all of this stuff. I mentioned Derek Webb. This was a Christian who had lots of people following his example. And he says, you know, ultimately, the way I learned the whole thing, it didn't work for me. And he left it. I think there's a little bit of a lever in all of us. But listen, sometimes there is a heart in you to be done with all that mess and turn to Christ or turn back to Christ. And I would just like to take a second to say if you wanted to follow the real Jesus in whatever the circumstance is that you're in right now today, how would you do it? I'm going to give us 3 baskets here. There's you're about to give the gospel message, probably going to call people to respond. Good. I'm for that. We should do that. And I like hearing it because it reminds me of my own faith and salvation. Cool. Second are people who are either in the church, maybe in Christ, maybe not, but you know when you hear this invitation, like that if you were in the crowd and you heard Jesus' message, you either need to repent or walk away because you are not with him. But you know. And then somebody else who's like, I'm kind of new around all this stuff, and I don't even know what you're talking about. I've heard half of it, like, got it, and the other half I heard it, and like, So here today in your regular life, or if you were there on that day 2,000 years ago, the way that Jesus would have you respond to him is to go like this. Okay, I am somebody walking in the way that I feel best in life. Or maybe not the way that I feel best, but I'm walking in the way that I'm walking anyhow. And I'm walking, and all of a sudden, I know that there's this opportunity, and there's 2 parts to this response. I'm going to turn around, and I'm going to grab a hold best I could of Jesus. And then I'm going to figure out from there what that means. There's nothing connected to messed up religion that issues forward from the heart of Jesus. I try to take great pains to go to saying this morning to saying he had a problem with this too. There is nobody that Jesus had harder words for than bad religion and bad religious leaders. So you're like, man, I can't. It's just too much screw up around all that. Yeah, for sure. I feel that way sometimes too. Hopefully you do too, because everything that happens, every message that goes forward, I mean, not from our church, I'm not talking about New Life Church, but I'm like, just go online and find the most popular people talking about something to do with Jesus, and you're like, I'm not sure that's right, or all these kind of different things. But Jesus himself is eminently valuable, and he relieves burdens, and he binds up wounds. And he draws people to repent of their sins and be able to have new life in him. If you want to know where to start with God, it just means you got to turn around. And you got to reach out and try to wrap your arms around Jesus' neck. Let him take you from there. And he will. And I want to invite you to respond. So if the band would go ahead and come on forward and get set, I want to just mention, there's enough people in the room this morning that there's people in all different situations. Really, I mean, that's true at your dinner table, at the house, there's always people in different situations. But I just like to speak these invitations of Jesus over you and ask you to respond in your heart, whatever way it is that God would lead you to, and then we're going to pray together. So we're going to sing together. Just bow your head, and when you hear that Jesus says this, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden. I will give you rest." Where does that hit you, and where's that true for you? Weary and heavy laden, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble of heart. You could find rest for your soul, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. If Jesus is inviting you today, what part of your life is he speaking to? What part of the way you're living, believing, thinking? But more importantly, like he says in the Sermon on the Mount, what part of your heart is he speaking to? You could have him by turning and trusting him. You could have more of him by turning again and trusting him again. It's repenting. It's believing. Let's stand together. I'm going to sing the song of response. And as God gives you grace, if you have business to do with him, do it while we sing. And we'll all go out from here encouraged to walk with him in newness of life.